You're climbing the first wave. The bow rises 45 degrees into the air, steel groaning as 10,000 tons of cargo shifts backward. You crest. For one moment, you see nothing but gray sky. Then you plunge down the other side, and the second wave hits before your ship has leveled. Water explodes across the deck. The bow buries itself into the trough. Every rivet screams. You're still underwater when you see it through the wheelhouse window. A third wall of water, higher than the first two, rushing toward you while your ship is nose down and defenseless. This is the trap. This is how the Great Lakes kill. This isn't a story about a storm. Storms are chaotic, unpredictable, survivable. This is a story about a specific hydrodynamic phenomenon that operates with mathematical precision. It's a story about wave resonance, structural harmonics, and the physics of metal fatigue. It's the story of how the largest ships ever built for freshwater, vessels longer than 2 football fields, constructed of inch-thick steel, can be snapped in half in less than 60 seconds. The Great Lakes don't need hurricanes. They don't need rogue waves. They have something more efficient, more deadly, and horrifyingly predictable. They have the Three Sisters. You're going to learn 3 things in this video. First, the actual physics of wave resonance. Why 3 waves are exponentially more dangerous than 1 large wave. Second, you're going to understand what really happened in the final 10 minutes of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the most famous shipwreck in American history. And third, you're going to hear the story of the SS Carl D. Bradley, the Queen of the Lakes, a ship so massive that its builders thought it was unsinkable, until Lake Michigan proved that size is no defense against physics. By the end, you'll understand why experienced captains still refuse to sail the Great Lakes in November, even with modern technology, GPS, and satellite weather. You'll understand why the Ojibwe people had a name for this pattern centuries before Europeans built their first ship on these waters. The Ojibwe people didn't call them the Three Sisters. That's a sailor's term, coined by European and American crews, who personified the waves as malevolent entities. But the Ojibwe understood the pattern long before steam engines and steel hulls. They called Lake Superior Gichigami, the Great Water, or Great Spirit. And they knew its temperament. They knew the rhythm of death. In Ojibwe knowledge, passed down through generations of canoe travel, there was a warning about Gichigami's anger. When the spirit was displeased, when the wind came from the north in the dying season, the waves would come in patterns. 2 waves to test the strength of your canoe, to test your skill as a paddler. And then a 3rd wave, larger, heavier, arriving before you had recovered, to finish what the first 2 had started. This wasn't superstition. This was observation. This was survival knowledge encoded in oral tradition. The Ojibwe were describing wave mechanics centuries before European physicists had equations to explain them. The sailors who came later, who built massive ships and thought themselves masters of these waters, learned the same lesson. They just learned it in steel and blood instead of birch bark and oral tradition. Ocean versus lake physics. To understand why the Great Lakes are uniquely deadly, you need to understand wave period, the time between successive waves. In the open ocean, the wave period during a storm typically ranges from 10 to 15 seconds. That's the gap between when one wave hits your ship and the next wave arrives. 10 to 15 seconds for your vessel to recover, for the bow to rise, for water to drain off the deck, for the hull to stop flexing. On the Great Lakes, the wave period during a storm is 4 to 6 seconds. That time deficit is everything. Imagine getting punched in the stomach. One punch you can absorb. You tense your muscles. You breathe through it. You recover. Now imagine getting punched every 2 seconds for a full minute. You never get to recover. Each punch lands while you're still reeling from the last one. Your body never returns to equilibrium. The cumulative damage becomes catastrophic. A ship is no different. The reason for this compressed wave period is fetch, the distance wind travels across open water. In the ocean, fetch can be thousands of miles. Waves have room to spread out to organize themselves into longer, more regular intervals. The Great Lakes have limited fetch. Lake Superior, the largest, has a maximum fetch of about 350 miles from the western shore to the eastern shore. When a November gale blows from the west, it has 350 miles to generate waves, enough distance to create massive energy, but not enough distance for the waves to spread out. The result is concentrated violence, high-energy waves compressed into short intervals. The ocean hits you with a sledgehammer every 15 seconds. The Great Lakes hit you with a hydraulic press every 5 seconds. And when those compressed waves arrive in sets of 3, with each wave slightly larger than the last, they create a mechanical trap that even modern ships cannot escape. Take a paperclip, bend it once. It flexes and returns to shape. Bend it twice. It's weaker, but still intact. Bend it 3 times in rapid succession, and it snaps. This is metal fatigue. Every material has what engineers call an elastic limit, the point beyond which it cannot return to its original shape. Bend steel within that limit, and it springs back. Bend it beyond that limit, and it deforms permanently. Bend it repeatedly, even within the elastic limit, and you create microscopic fractures that accumulate with each flex until the metal fails completely. A ship's hull is designed to flex. It has to. No weld, no rivet, no structure can be perfectly rigid when subjected to thousands of tons of force. Naval architects account for this. They design hulls with specific flex tolerances. A 700-foot freighter is expected to bend as much as 6 inches between bow and stern in heavy seas. 6 inches of flex, spread across 700 feet of steel, is manageable. The metal bends and returns. The rivets groan, but hold. The hull survives. But that calculation assumes adequate time between flexes. It assumes the ship has 10 to 15 seconds to return to neutral before the next wave hits. It assumes ocean wave periods. On the Great Lakes, that assumption is fatal. When a ship encounters a wave, it experiences one of 2 mechanical stresses, hogging or sagging. Hogging occurs when the wave lifts the middle of the ship. The bow and stern drop relative to the center. The hull bends upward, forming a shallow arch. The bottom plates are put under tension. They're being stretched. The top plates are put under compression. They're being squeezed. Imagine holding a long ruler by its center and letting both ends droop. That's hogging. Sagging is the opposite. It occurs when waves support the bow and stern while the middle of the ship drops into a trough. The hull bends downward, forming a shallow valley. Now the bottom plates are under compression and the top plates are under tension. The entire stress distribution reverses. In normal ocean conditions, a ship has time to transition between these states. The hull hogs, returns to neutral, then sags, then returns to neutral again. The metal flexes, but it flexes within safe parameters because it has time to recover between cycles. The 3 sisters eliminate that recovery time. The first wave causes hogging. The hull bends upward. Before it can return to neutral, the second wave hits, forcing the ship into sagging. The stress reverses instantly. Bottom plates that were stretching are now compressing. Top plates that were compressing are now stretching. The metal doesn't have time to settle. The microscopic structure of the steel is being worked back and forth like a paperclip in the hands of a nervous student. Then the third wave arrives. The third wave is the kill shot. It doesn't matter if it causes hogging or sagging. The hull has already been compromised by the rapid stress reversal. The metal has been flexed beyond its fatigue limit. The welds have been stressed past their tolerance. And when the third wave hits, the ship snaps, not slowly, not gradually, in seconds. Survivors, and there are very few, describe the sound as a gunshot, a crack so loud it's heard over the shriek of the wind and the roar of the waves. The ship doesn't bend anymore. it breaks. The resonance trap. Here's where the physics becomes truly terrifying. Every structure has a natural frequency, a rate at which it wants to vibrate. Tap a wine glass and it rings at a specific pitch. That pitch is determined by the size, shape, and material of the glass. If you can match that frequency with an external force, say, a sustained musical note at the exact same pitch, you can cause the glass to vibrate more and more violently until it shatters. This is resonance. Ships have natural frequencies too, and the natural vibration frequency of a 700-foot steel freighter, the kind that dominated Great Lakes shipping in the mid-20th century, is almost exactly the same as the wave frequency during a Great Lakes storm. Think about what that means. The waves aren't just hitting the ship. They're arriving at the exact rhythm that causes the ship's structure to amplify the stress. Each wave doesn't just add its own force. It multiplies the force already present in the hull. The ship becomes a tuning fork, vibrating in harmony with the water trying to destroy it. This is why the Three Sisters are so deadly. It's not just three waves. It's three waves arriving at the resonant frequency of the ship's hull, each one amplifying the structural stress left by the previous wave. In engineering terms, this is called harmonic loading, and it's one of the most dangerous phenomena in structural mechanics. The waves don't need to be enormous. They just need to be synchronized with the ship's natural frequency. A series of 30-foot waves arriving at 4-second intervals can generate more cumulative stress than a single 50-foot wave with a 15-second period. The Great Lakes, through pure geometric coincidence, produce exactly the wrong wave pattern to match the natural frequency of exactly the wrong ships. The mystery of the Edmund Fitzgerald. At 7 p.m. on November 10th, 1975, Captain Ernest McSorley of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald radioed the SS Arthur M. Anderson, the ship following behind him in the storm. The Anderson's captain asked how the Fitzgerald was doing. McSorley's response, "We are holding our own." By 7 p.m., the Edmund Fitzgerald was gone, not sinking, not listing, not sending distress calls. Gone. Somewhere in that 10-minute window, a ship longer than 2 football fields, carrying 26,000 tons of taconite pellets, crewed by 29 experienced sailors, simply vanished from the surface of Lake Superior. The Andersons' radar showed the Fitzgerald's blip one moment, then nothing. No mayday, no wreckage bobbing to the surface, just absence. The official investigation concluded that the Fitzgerald sank due to flooding, possibly from damaged hatch covers allowing water into the cargo hold. That explanation satisfied the paperwork. It did not satisfy the sailors, because flooding doesn't explain the timeline. A ship taking on water lists. It settles. It gives its crew time to react, time to send a distress call, time to put on survival suits and launch lifeboats. The Fitzgerald did none of those things. The Edmund Fitzgerald didn't sink. It broke. And the only mechanism that explains the sudden catastrophic failure is the Three Sisters. The missing 10 minutes. Here's what likely happened in those final 10 minutes, reconstructed from wreckage analysis, survivor testimony from similar incidents, and the physics we've already discussed. At 7 p.m., the Fitzgerald was damaged but functional. The ship had taken waves over the deck all day. Hatch covers were compromised. Water was in the cargo hold. The ship was riding lower than normal. Witnesses on the Anderson reported the Fitzgerald had a noticeable list. But McSorley said they were holding their own, and there's no reason to doubt him. The ship was still making headway. The engines were running. The hull was intact. Sometime between 7 and 7 p.m., the ship encountered a wave set. Not just any waves, a set synchronized with the ship's resonant frequency. The Three Sisters. The first wave hit the bow. With the ship already riding low, already heavy with water in the hold, the bow buried itself deep into the wave. The forward section went completely under. Water exploded across the deck with enough force to collapse ventilation systems and blow out windows. The ship's forward momentum stopped. 10,000 tons of cargo shifted backward. Before the ship could recover, before the bow could rise, the second wave hit. This one didn't just swamp the deck, it drove the bow even deeper. The ship went into an extreme sagging position, nose down, stern rising. The hull flexed beyond its elastic limit. Welds that had been stressed all day, that had been repeatedly tested by earlier waves, began to fail. The third wave arrived while the ship was at maximum stress. The bow was still underwater. The stern was elevated. The hull was already bent in a deep sag. And then a wall of water, higher than the first two waves, slammed into the midsection of the ship. The Fitzgerald snapped amidships. The break was so sudden, so catastrophic, that the two halves of the ship went down almost simultaneously. The bow section, already underwater, simply continued its dive. The stern section, suddenly unsupported, flipped and followed. Total elapsed time from first wave to final disappearance, less than 60 seconds. No one had time to react. No one had time to put on a survival suit. No one had time to send a mayday, because by the time they understood what was happening, they were already underwater. The wreckage, found in 530 feet of water, confirmed the scenario. The ship lies in two pieces. The bow section and stern section are separated by several hundred feet. The breakpoint is clean, catastrophic, indicative of sudden structural failure rather than gradual flooding. The hull didn't peel open. It snapped. The Edmund Fitzgerald didn't drown. It was broken by the lake. The fall of the Queen. But the Fitzgerald wasn't the first, and it wasn't the largest. 17 years earlier, on November 18, 1958, the SS Carl D. Bradley set out from Rogers City, Michigan, on what should have been a routine late-season voyage. The Bradley was carrying limestone across Lake Michigan. It had made this run hundreds of times. There was no reason to expect anything different. The Carl D. Bradley was the Queen of the Lakes, the longest ship on the Great Lakes at the time, measuring 639 feet from bow to stern. It was a giant of freshwater shipping, purpose-built for the efficient transport of bulk cargo. It had been in service since 1927, 31 years of proven reliability. Size was supposed to mean safety. Length was supposed to mean stability. The Bradley was so large that sailors joked it would take a hurricane to sink her. They were wrong. On the evening of November the 18th, the Bradley was 30 miles southwest of Gull Island in northern Lake Michigan when a storm overtook it. The wind was out of the southwest, gusting over 60 miles per hour, generating waves 25 to 30 feet high. Rough, but not unprecedented. The Bradley had weathered worse. At approximately 5 p.m., the crew felt a shudder run through the ship. Not the normal groan of a hull flexing in heavy seas. This was different, sharper, more violent. First Mate Elmer Fleming, who would become one of only 2 survivors, later described it as like the ship hit a wall. The Bradley had entered the trap. Within minutes, the situation deteriorated catastrophically. The ship began taking on water. Not slowly, but in a torrent. The stern was noticeably lower than the bow. Captain Roland Bryan ordered the pumps engaged, but it was already too late. The ship wasn't leaking, it was broken. At 5 p.m., Captain Bryan sent a mayday. "We are in serious trouble." By 5 p.m., the Bradley was giving the order to abandon ship. In less than 20 minutes, a ship the length of 2 city blocks had gone from routine operation to evacuation. The crew launched lifeboats, but in 30-foot seas with 60-mile-per-hour winds, the boats were death traps themselves. Men were thrown into 38-degree water. Survival suits didn't exist yet. Life jackets provided flotation, but no thermal protection. And then, as First Mate Fleming watched from a raft, the Carl D. Bradley broke in half. He didn't just see it split. He saw the stern section twist, rotate out of alignment with the bow, as if a giant hand had grabbed each end of the ship and wrung it like a towel. The structural failure wasn't a clean snap. It was a torsional fracture, the hull twisting under combined stress from hogging, sagging, and the resonant vibration of wave after wave hitting at the ship's natural frequency. The bow section rose almost vertically out of the water, hung there for a moment like a tombstone, and then slid backward into Lake Michigan. The stern followed seconds later, upside down, propeller still spinning in the air. Of the 35 men aboard, 33 died. 2 survived, first mate Elmer Fleming and deck watchman Frank Mays. They spent 15 hours clinging to a raft in freezing water, keeping each other awake, before being rescued by the Coast Guard cutter Sundew. Both men lived to tell the story of how the Queen broke her back. The Carl D. Bradley, the Queen of the Lakes, the ship too big to sink, was killed by the same phenomenon that would claim the Edmund Fitzgerald 17 years later. It wasn't size that mattered. It wasn't strength. It was frequency. The Great Lakes are unique in global maritime geography. They are large enough to generate ocean-scale wave energy, but confined enough to compress that energy into devastating frequency patterns. Fetch, the distance wind travels across open water, is the primary determinant of wave size. The longer the fetch, the more energy the wind can transfer to the water, and the larger the waves grow. In the open ocean, fetch can extend for thousands of miles. Storms in the North Atlantic regularly generate swells that have traveled across the entire ocean basin, accumulating energy the entire way. Lake Superior has a maximum fetch of approximately 350 miles, from Duluth at the western end to the eastern shore near Sault Ste. Marie. That's enough distance for a November gale to generate waves 30 feet high or more, but it's not enough distance for those waves to organize into the long, regular swells typical of the ocean. Instead, the waves remain steep and closely spaced. The energy is concentrated. And when those waves approach the shoreline or encounter underwater ridges and shoals, they undergo a transformation called wave shoaling. Wave shoaling, the compression. In deep water, waves move in long, rolling swells. The wave energy is distributed throughout the water column, from the surface down to a depth equal to about half the wavelength. The waves move fast and relatively flat. When waves encounter shallow water, when the depth becomes less than half the wavelength, the bottom of the wave begins to drag on the lake bed. The wave slows down, but the energy doesn't disappear. It has to go somewhere. It goes up. The wave compresses vertically. The back of the wave catches up with the front. The swell transforms into a wall. What was a 20-foot rolling wave in deep water becomes a 30-foot near vertical face in shallow water. The Great Lakes are riddled with underwater ridges, reefs, and shoals, remnants of ancient glacial moraines. Lake Superior, in particular, has complex underwater topography near Isle Royale, the Keweenaw Peninsula, and Whitefish Point. These features create perfect conditions for wave shoaling. A ship can be in relatively manageable seas one moment, then hit a shoaling zone and encounter waves 50% taller and infinitely steeper. And because the ship is now in shallower water, the wave period doesn't change. The waves just get taller and closer together. This is how the three sisters form. 3 waves in a set hit a shoaling zone simultaneously. The first wave stands up. The second wave, right behind it, stands up even taller because it's climbing onto the back of the first wave. The third wave, benefiting from the compression of both previous waves, becomes a moving wall of water that can be 40 feet high or more. And because they've been compressed by the shoaling effect, they arrive even faster than normal, sometimes as little as 3 seconds apart. There is no escaping that. The captains who have survived Three Sisters encounters rarely speak publicly, but in the close community of Great Lakes shipping, the stories circulate, passed from pilot to pilot, from captain to first mate, whispered in the bars of port towns when the storms are howling outside. One account, from a captain who survived an encounter in the 1990s and who refused to give his name for fear of being seen as dramatic or unreliable, describes the sensation of the third wave. The bow went under. completely under. I was looking out the pilot house window at green water. Not spray, not waves breaking, solid water. The whole front of the ship was submerged. And then I felt the stern lift. The propeller came out of the water. I could hear it spinning in the air. For about 5 seconds, we were a teeter-totter. Then the bow came up, and the water drained off, and we kept going. But if that wave had been 5 feet taller, or if we'd been 10 feet shorter, we wouldn't have come up. We'd have gone straight down. Another account describes the mechanical violence. You think you know what the ship sounds like. You've heard it creak and groan in heavy weather 1,000 times. But when the Three Sisters hit, it's different. The whole ship screams. Every weld, every rivet, every plate. It sounds like the hull is tearing itself apart. You can feel it in your bones. And you stand there knowing that there's nothing you can do. You can't steer out of it. You can't slow down or speed up fast enough. You just hold on and hope the math works in your favor. The common thread in all these accounts is the speed. From the first wave to the third wave, the entire event lasts less than 15 seconds. There is no time to react, no time to adjust course, no time to call for help. You either survive or you don't, and the deciding factor is whether your ship's structural integrity can withstand the resonant frequency of the waves. Most modern captains who have encountered the Three Sisters describe it as pure chance. The ones who lived aren't more skilled, they're just luckier. Their ships were slightly stronger, or the waves were slightly smaller, or the angle of impact was slightly more favorable. Margins measured in feet, in seconds, in degrees. On the Great Lakes, that's the difference between a story you tell at the bar and a name on a memorial. 90 seconds. That's the window. From the moment the first wave of a Three Sisters set hits a vulnerable ship to the moment that ship disappears beneath the surface, 90 seconds or less. Compare that to the Titanic, which took 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. The crew had time to wake passengers, load lifeboats, send distress signals, and organize evacuation. Hundreds of people survived. Compare it to the Costa Concordia, which took hours to fully capsize after hitting a rock. Everyone had time to evacuate. Only 32 people died, and most of those were due to panic and poor crowd management, not lack of time. When a Great Lakes freighter encounters the Three Sisters, there is no evacuation. There are no lifeboats successfully launched. There is no time to put on a survival suit, a process that takes at least 2 minutes when you're calm and have help, far longer when you're being thrown around a tilting deck in 60-mile-per-hour winds. The math is brutal. If the ship breaks at 7 p.m., it's on the bottom by 7 p.m. The crew has less than 60 seconds from the moment they realize something is catastrophically wrong to the moment they're underwater. And for half of that time, they're experiencing G-forces from the ship's violent motion that make it nearly impossible to move, let alone execute complex survival procedures. This is why so many Great Lakes wrecks go down with all hands. It's not that the sailors were unskilled or unprepared. It's that the timeline of disaster is faster than human reaction time. The Edmund Fitzgerald, 29 dead, 0 survivors. The Carl D. Bradley, 33 dead, 2 survivors. The SS Daniel J. Morrell, which broke in half on Lake Huron in 1966, 28 dead, 1 survivor. The SS Henry B. Smith, lost in 1913, 25 dead, 0 survivors. The pattern is consistent. When the Three Sisters claim a ship, they claim nearly everyone aboard. Modern ships have technology that would seem like magic to the captains of the 1950s and 60s. GPS gives position accuracy within meters. Satellite communication provides instant contact with shore stations. Weather radar shows approaching storms with precise detail, but none of that prevents the Three Sisters. Radar detects precipitation. It shows rain, snow, and the density of clouds. It can identify the location of a storm system and its general movement. What it cannot do is show wave patterns. Waves don't reflect radar signals the way rain does. From the perspective of ship's radar, the surface of the lake looks the same whether it's calm or actively forming a Three Sisters set. Modern wave modeling exists, but it's statistical, not real-time. Meteorologists can predict that conditions are favorable for large waves, but they cannot tell a captain 300 yards ahead of you there is a set of 3 waves arriving at 4-second intervals that will resonate with your hull frequency. That level of precision doesn't exist. By the time a captain sees the first wave, actually sees it with his eyes through the pilot house window, it's too late to avoid it. Ships don't turn on a dime. A 700-foot freighter needs minutes to execute a course change, and it needs even longer to significantly alter speed. The Three Sisters arrive in seconds. Some modern ships are equipped with forward-looking sonar that can detect large waves ahead of the ship, giving a few seconds of warning. But a few seconds isn't enough time to do anything except brace for impact. You can't turn. You can't stop. You can only hold on and hope. This is why, despite all our technology, the fundamental danger remains unchanged. The physics of wave resonance and structural fatigue don't care about radar or GPS. They care about frequency, amplitude, and the material properties of steel, and none of those variables have changed since the 1950s. On November 9, 1913, the SS Henry B. Smith left the port of Marquette, Michigan, carrying a load of iron ore. Captain James Owen was an experienced master, and the Smith was a modern, well-maintained vessel. The weather was rough, but Owen had sailed through worse. He radioed the port authority that he intended to make the crossing to the lower lakes. The Smith was seen by witnesses as it left Marquette Harbor, turning into the waves, engines running smoothly. Then a squall moved in, a sudden intense burst of wind and snow that reduced visibility to near zero. When the squall cleared 20 minutes later, the Henry B. Smith was gone. No distress call, no wreckage, no survivors. The ship, its crew of 25, and its cargo of iron ore simply vanished. It would be a century before the wreckage was found, and when divers finally located it in 535 feet of water in 2013, the condition of the hull told the story. The ship had broken in half. The bow section and stern section lay hundreds of feet apart. The break was clean, sudden, catastrophic, consistent with structural failure under resonant loading. The Henry B. Smith almost certainly encountered the Three Sisters in that squall. The waves would have been invisible in the snow and spray until they were right on top of the ship. Owen would have had no warning, no time to turn, no opportunity to adjust speed or heading. The first wave would have hit the bow, the second would have stopped the ship's momentum, and the third would have snapped the hull before anyone aboard fully understood what was happening. The squall that hid the Smith's final moments also prevented any rescue attempt. By the time visibility cleared and nearby ships realized the Smith was missing, there was nothing to rescue. The ship was already on the bottom, and in the 38-degree water of Lake Superior in November. Anyone who survived the initial sinking would have been dead from hypothermia within 10 minutes. The Henry B. Smith is one of dozens of ships lost during the Great Storm of 1913, a multi-day tempest that sank or damaged more than 40 vessels across all 5 Great Lakes. But the Smith's disappearance, sudden, complete, without warning, is the signature of the Three Sisters. The SS Kamloops left Port Arthur, now Thunder Bay, on December 1, 1927, bound for Fort William with a cargo of package goods and a crew of 22. The weather was deteriorating, but Captain William Bryan elected to proceed. The Kamloops was sturdy, and the route was familiar. The ship was seen struggling in heavy seas near Ile Royale on December 6th. A passing steamer noted that the Kamloops appeared to be making slow progress, but was still under power. Then the snow intensified, and the Kamloops disappeared from view. It was never seen again. For 50 years, the Kamloops was a ghost. Then, in 1977, a team of sport divers found the wreck in 270 feet of water near the northeast shore of Ile Royale. The ship was largely intact, but had clearly sunk suddenly. Cargo was still in the hold. The crew's personal effects were in their quarters. There had been no time for an orderly evacuation. Most haunting of all, the body of one crew member, perfectly preserved by the cold, low-oxygen water of Lake Superior, was found floating in the engine room, still wearing his work clothes. Divers nicknamed him Old Whitey. He remains there to this day, a permanent crew member of a ship that's been underwater for nearly a century. The Kamloops likely encountered wave conditions that overwhelmed its engines. The ship was older and smaller than the Bradley or the Fitzgerald, but the mechanism of death was probably the same. A wave set that arrived faster than the ship could recover, causing either catastrophic flooding or structural failure. The ship went down in minutes, taking everyone aboard with it. What makes the Kamloops particularly tragic is that it sank within sight of land. Isle Royale was less than a mile away when the ship went down. In theory, the crew could have swum that distance, but in December, water temperatures and with waves still hammering the lake, within sight of land might as well have been 1,000 miles. The cold killed as efficiently as the waves. Why? The Three Sisters is a sailor's term. Sailors personify the ocean. They always have. Ships are she. The sea is her. Storms have names. This isn't sentimentality. It's a psychological coping mechanism. When you're surrounded by a force that can kill you instantly and capriciously, it helps to imagine that force as an entity with motivations, with moods, with a personality you can learn to predict. The Three Sisters are personified because they feel personal. A single large wave is an event. It's dramatic, dangerous, but it's over quickly. You climb the wave, you crest, you descend, and it's done. Your heart rate spikes, then settles. It's terrifying in the moment, but survivable. The Three Sisters feel different. They feel like a hunt. The first wave gets your attention. The second wave puts you off balance. And the third wave finishes you while you're still reeling. It's sequential, methodical, inevitable. It feels like the lake is hunting you, not just blowing wind and stacking up water. Sailors describe them as sisters because the waves seem to work together, coordinating their attack. The first two waves were smaller. The younger sisters, testing your defenses, wearing you down. The third wave was the eldest, the strongest, arriving at the moment of maximum vulnerability to deliver the killing blow. This is folklore, of course. Waves don't think. They don't coordinate. They're the product of wind, fetch, and bathymetry, mechanical processes with no intent. But when you're on the deck of a ship that's about to break in half, when you can see the third wave rising above the pilot house, while the second wave is still draining off the deck, it doesn't feel mechanical. It feels malicious. The Ojibwe understood this too. They didn't call them sisters, but they recognized the same pattern. Two waves to test you, a third to finish you. It's a human universal. When nature kills in patterns, we personify those patterns because it gives us the illusion of understanding, and therefore the illusion of control. But on the Great Lakes in November, there is no control. There's only frequency, amplitude, and the material properties of steel. It is not the height of the wave that kills. It is the frequency. This is the core thesis, the fundamental truth that explains every wreck we've discussed. A ship can survive a 50-foot wave if it has time to recover. A ship cannot survive 3 30-foot waves arriving 5 seconds apart at the resonant frequency of its hull. The Great Lakes, through pure geometric coincidence, produce exactly the wrong wave pattern. The fetch is long enough to generate high-energy waves, but short enough to keep those waves compressed into short intervals. The depth is shallow enough in critical areas to cause wave shoaling, which makes the waves steeper and taller. And the natural frequency of the ships that were built for these waters in the mid-20th century matches, almost perfectly, the frequency of storm waves. It's a trap built from mathematics. And mathematics doesn't negotiate. The Edmund Fitzgerald was 729 feet long. The Carl D. Bradley was 639 feet. The Daniel J. Morrell was 603 feet. These were not small boats. They were industrial giants, purpose-built for the unique demands of Great Lakes shipping, and all of them broke in half because they were the wrong length for the wavelength of the water they sailed. If those ships had been 500 feet long or 800 feet long, they might have survived. If the lakes had been deeper or shallower, the wave frequency would have been different. If the fetch had been longer, the wave period would have stretched out. If any one of a dozen variables had been slightly different, the resonance trap wouldn't exist. But the variables are what they are. The lakes are the size they are. The storms blow when they blow, and the frequency matches. The legacy. The wrecks of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s changed Great Lakes shipping forever. After the Carl D. Bradley sank, regulations were passed requiring more frequent structural inspections of aging vessels. The Bradley had been in service for 31 years. Its steel had been flexed by waves hundreds of thousands of times. The cumulative metal fatigue was invisible to visual inspection, but catastrophic under stress. New regulations mandated ultrasonic testing that could detect microscopic fractures before they became critical. After the Edmund Fitzgerald, regulations changed again. Hatch covers were redesigned to be more secure. Loading procedures were modified to prevent ships from riding too low in heavy weather. Weather routing became mandatory. Ships were required to report their positions and intended courses so that port authorities could warn them of dangerous conditions. The construction of ships changed too. Newer vessels were designed with more flexible hulls that could better absorb wave energy without fracturing. Welding techniques improved. Steel alloys became stronger and more resistant to fatigue. But the fundamental danger remains. You cannot re-engineer a lake. You cannot change the fetch, the depth, the bathymetry, or the wind patterns. You cannot prevent storms from forming in November, when Arctic air masses collide with the relatively warm water of the lakes. You cannot eliminate wave resonance. It's a law of physics, not a design flaw. Modern ships are safer than the ships of the 1950s, but they are not safe. They're still made of steel. They still have a natural frequency, and the waves still arrive at 4 to 6 second intervals during a November gale. The most significant change hasn't been in ship design. It's been in behavior. Modern shipping companies simply don't sail the Great Lakes in November unless it's absolutely unavoidable. The economics of shipping have changed. It's no longer worth the risk to squeeze out a few more late-season runs before the lakes freeze. The ore stays in port. The grain elevators wait. The ships stay tied to the docks because the captains know, the companies know. Everyone who works on these waters knows that in November, the trap is set, and no amount of modern technology changes the math. The list of the dead. These are the ships confirmed or strongly suspected to have been lost to the Three Sisters phenomenon. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald, Lake Superior, November 10, 1975. 29 dead. The most famous shipwreck in Great Lakes history, immortalized in song. Broken in half likely due to a Three Sisters encounter, combined with pre-existing structural damage and flooding. The SS Carl D. Bradley, Lake Michigan, November 18, 1958. 33 dead, 2 survivors. The longest ship on the lakes at the time. Broke in half with such violence that witnesses described the stern twisting out of alignment with the bow. The SS Daniel J. Morrell, Lake Huron, November 29, 1966. 28 dead, 1 survivor. Broke in half during a storm. The sole survivor, Dennis Hale, spent hours clinging to a raft in freezing water and watched the stern section of the ship, still lit, still with men aboard, drift away into the darkness before sinking. The SS Henry B. Smith, Lake Superior, November 9, 1913. 25 dead, 0 survivors. Disappeared during a squall. Wreck found a century later, broken in half, consistent with sudden structural failure. The SS Kamloops, Lake Superior, December 6, 1927. 22 dead, 0 survivors. Found intact but sunk suddenly. likely from wave damage, overwhelming the engines, or causing critical flooding. These 5 ships alone account for 137 deaths, and these are only the ships large enough and famous enough to be extensively documented. Dozens of smaller freighters, fishing vessels, and tugboats have been lost under similar circumstances, their stories forgotten, their crews unmemorialized except in port records and fading newspaper clippings. The lakes do not give up their dead easily. The cold water preserves bodies, but the depth and the storms make recovery dangerous or impossible. Many sailors lost to the Three Sisters are still aboard their ships, entombed in steel coffins hundreds of feet below the surface. The modern danger. It would be comforting to believe that this is all history, that modern ships, modern weather forecasting, and modern safety regulations have eliminated the danger of the Three Sisters, but that would be a lie. In November 1995, the SS James R. Barker, a modern 1,000-foot freighter, one of the largest ships on the lakes, encountered heavy seas on Lake Superior. The ship survived, but Captain Bernie Cooper later described the experience in terms that would be familiar to the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We took 3 waves over the deck. The first one was big, the second one was bigger. The third one buried the bow completely. We thought we were going down. The Barker survived because it was larger, newer, and stronger than the ships of the 1950s and 60s. But the fact that a modern vessel could experience the same pattern, the same 3-wave sequence, with each wave progressively larger, proves that the phenomenon hasn't gone away. It can't go away. It's geometry. It's physics. As long as November gales blow across 350 miles of fetch, as long as waves shoal over underwater ridges, as long as steel ships have natural frequencies that match wave periods, the Three Sisters will rise. The shipping companies know this. Every November, they watch the weather forecasts with the same dread that the captains of the 1950s felt. When the wind picks up and the waves start to build, the ships stay in port. The oar sits on the docks. The crews wait, because the alternative is unacceptable. The economics of modern shipping cannot absorb the loss of a 1,000-foot freighter and its crew. The legal liability is catastrophic. The public relations disaster would be permanent. But more than that, the people who make these decisions have learned the lesson that their predecessors learned in blood. The lakes are the boss. When the lakes say, "Stay home," you stay home. Final thought. The Great Lakes are waiting. They've been waiting for 10,000 years, ever since the glaciers retreated and left these basins carved into the bedrock of the continent. They've been waiting since the first Ojibwe canoes crossed Gichigami. They've been waiting since the first European ships sailed these waters with holds full of fur and dreams of empire. The trap is geometric and permanent. 350 miles of fetch, oriented northeast to southwest, perfect for funneling November gales into maximum wave generation. Underwater ridges and shoals, remnants of ancient moraines, positioned exactly where they'll cause wave shoaling. Water cold enough to kill in minutes, ensuring that even survivors of a sinking have almost no chance of rescue. And every few years, someone gets caught. Maybe they're pushing the season, trying to get one more load of ore before the lakes freeze. Maybe they're confident in their ship, their crew, their technology. Maybe they're just unlucky, in the wrong place at the wrong moment, when the wind and the waves and the bathymetry align. It doesn't matter. When the Three Sisters rise, the reasons don't matter. The math takes over. The first wave hits. The second wave hits before the ship recovers. And the third wave finishes what the first two started. The lakes have time. They don't care if it takes 5 years or 50 between wrecks. They don't care if modern ships are stronger or weather forecasting is better. The trap is still there, waiting for the variables to align. The right ship, the right length, the right hull frequency, the right storm, the right waves. And when those variables align, the Three Sisters rise again. The captains know, the sailors know, anyone who works on the Great Lakes knows. In November, when the wind howls and the waves build, when the fetch is long and the period is short. The lakes are not a workplace. They are a test. Most years, everyone passes. Most years, the ships stay in port when the weather is bad, and they emerge when the storms pass, and everyone goes home safe. But not every year, not every time, because the lakes are still there, and they're still waiting.